Hello, welcome on in everybody. Today I've got for you my Fire Staff and Rapier damage / mobility build for PvP. This is a beastly light armor build that hits really hard, is incredibly mobile, and weirdly enough does a really good job at solo PvP, especially when you're outnumbered. Personally, I find light armor to be one of the best armor weights for PvP because mobility is so important for PvP in this game. So with this build, I've invested super heavily into making sure I can roll as much as possible while still preserving a ton of damage with the Rapier and having some pretty good damage with the Fire Staff too. This is personally one of my favorite builds to play, and I think it has a very high skill ceiling, so there's definitely a lot you can do with a spec like this. If you want a written guide to this build, you can find a link to it down in the description below at my website, pvpnewworld.com. And of course, I've got a lot of gameplay footage at the end of the video if you guys want to see some more of the build in action. And without further ado, let's take a look at that build. Starting off with the attributes here, 150 dexterity, 169 intelligence, and 150 in constitution. The mix of dexterity intelligence, absolutely fantastic for upping our outgoing rapier damage because it does scale off of both. Now obviously with this setup, the Fire Staff is not going to hit as hard as if we dumped into intelligence fully, but it's only about 20% weaker than the full intelligence split. So honestly, I think I got a lot more out of this split than I thought I would initially, especially since the rapier damage becomes a lot better when you do the split rather than stacking full intelligence. So let's get into why I chose these points here, and it's obviously for these jump points. The dexterity, we get the 5% chance to critical hit, great for both of our weapons, actually more so for the Fire Staff. And then we get the 5% thrust damage, fantastic for the Rapier, again just upping that outgoing damage. And then last but not least, dodges cost 10 less stamina. This is massive for the defense of this build. Light armor dodge roll normally costs 50 stamina, and you have 100 stamina total. So if you dodge twice in a row, you drain all of your stamina. And that is a very dangerous position to put yourself in while you're in a fight. Having the roll cost 40 stamina means that you can do the double roll without blowing your full stamina pool. On top of it, I've also got 109 maximum stamina on this build thanks to some jewelry traits. So essentially, the dexterity not only gives us that big damage on the Rapier, but it also gives us a huge amount of defensive utility by making our dodge roll so much more accessible. Now in the intelligence tree, we've got that 10% damage to light and heavy magic attacks. This is only really good for the Fire Staff, doesn't affect the Rapier. We get a 10% increase to critical hit damage. This is absolutely amazing for both of our weapons. And then last but not least, 15% increase to elemental damage. If you're going to be playing a dexterity intelligence split and using a intelligence scaling weapon with it, definitely make sure you get that 15% elemental damage. This is the biggest damage increaser out of all of the different passives you can get for your intelligence tree, and it's just because you consistently get a 15% elemental damage bonus. Ideally, we would have that 10 mana after a roll dodge passive as well, but you know, I've got to be a lot closer to a 600 gear score gear loadout in order to have enough attributes to reach that value. So if you guys are there yourselves, you can invest in that last passive here. If you don't have enough points, you can just be like me and use mana potions instead. And then finally for Constitution, all health consumables are 20% stronger. Absolutely amazing for our healing power. We get the increased max health by 10% of our physical armor. This build is a light armor build, so that actually doesn't give us the most compared to a heavy armor build, but the really important one, minus 10% to critical damage taken for 150 points in Constitution. So not only do we get a nice amount of additional hit points by investing into 150 con, but that critical damage reduction is absolutely massive for PvP. That includes backstabs, headshots, all of the things that are likely doing a ton of damage to you right now. Yeah, that's a really nice one to get your hands on, and I would recommend for any PvP build 150 points in Constitution to get access to that passive. Alright, let's take a look at the gear I'm running on this guy. Starting off with the Rapier, I've got Constitution with Rogue. Rogue is definitely the trait you want on the Rapier. 18% backstab damage, absolutely insane for the amount of damage increase it gives you. Ideally, if I did have the purple Rapier with the traits of choice, it would be Rogue and Enchanted, and the gold Rapier would be Rogue, Enchanted, and Vicious. Constitution is fine as the attribute here. Anything that gives us Dex, Intelligence, or Constitution is the attributes of choice for the build, so yeah, can't go wrong with that. And then Gambit as the gem. We are a roll dodge focused build. You're going to be rolling a lot to keep yourself alive. So you oftentimes will not have full stamina on this build, and you'll get a nice damage bonus from the Gambit trait. A particularly nice combo is when you hit that riposte and then roll behind somebody, taking advantage of the Gambit boost and getting the nice backstab after the riposte stun. And then the Fire Staff, I also have the Gambit as well as the gem. Again, we're going to be doing a lot of rolling, especially on our Fire Staff bar, because that's kind of a kite ranged bar. So yeah, increased damage from that, fantastic. Intelligence, again, a good attribute. And then we've got Keenly Jagged and Lostbane. Ideally, Keenly Jagged and Keen. Both of those traits very good for the Fire Staff, either or, essentially, if you can only get access to one. And the gold Fire Staff would be Keen, Keenly Jagged, and Keenly Empowered for that damage bonus when you swap back over to the Rapier. And then taking a look at the gear here, it is the PvP faction gear with the Refreshing Resilient trait, and I've got Wilderness Ward as the gem of choice. I like Wilderness Ward, just majority physical damage reduction, but a little bit of elemental damage reduction on top of it, just to give you kind of a little bit more balanced defense, but there's definitely more of a physical meta in PvP, so I think this is a good approach. And these are a little bit cheaper than Onyx's to buy too, if price is a factor for you, something to keep in mind. And then these are all Intelligence, Constitution, again, good attributes for the build. And then the helmet, I've got Reinforced Mining Luck. Honestly, I took this helmet over the faction helmet simply because the faction helmet looks really ugly. And I needed to have a nice helmet. I like the mask on this, so yeah, this was definitely a win over the weird hairpiece faction helmet that I had before, even though I'm missing that refreshing trait. There are some perks that I would actually like on the armor that are specific to the weapons. The first one is Sundering Riposte for the additional damage when you land a riposte on someone. And then finally, Empowering Fireball would also be fantastic for the build, so you can do a little bit more damage after swapping off your Fire Staff back to your Rapier. And then let's take a look at the jewelry on this build. The perks that the jewelry give you are very important, I think, buildcraft-wise. All the perks that you get are important, but the jewelry has a lot of unique perks that you want to get your hands on. Starting off with the amulet, the most important piece here is the health perk. The health perk will give us almost 9% more maximum health. That gives us a lot more health than just the 22 constitution that this piece of jewelry gives. So yeah, definitely want to go with that. My second preferred trait here, instead of flame protection, would actually be divines for the increased healing power. But you can kind of take whatever second trait you want. I personally just like divines. But even the returning stamina perk on the necklace would be really good to give you your stamina back if you get hit while below 50% health. Definitely something valuable for this roll-heavy build. Strike Ward, not ideal. Again, I would prefer the Wilderness Ward here instead. Constitution, just fine. Moving on to the ring, this is a very important piece for this build. Constitution, again, just fine. Fire Ward, we would prefer the Wilderness Ward. And then I've got Thrust Damage and Hardy. Thrust damage is not bad. I mean, Rapier is our primary damage dealer, so this does up our Rapier damage, which is pretty sweet. But Hardy is really that important trait. I know that we have the reduced cost on our roll. Normally, Hardy would be so good for light armor because it allows you to do the double roll without having to invest into dex. But when you do both of them, well, you just have a beastly sustain build that allows you to roll a crazy amount. So yeah, definitely like the Hardy trait here. And instead of thrust damage, I think the ideal perk would be Keen Awareness for the additional critical hit chance. That would play in really well to the crits on our Fire Staff, as well as giving us a little bit more burst with the Rapier if we aren't getting those backstabs. And then for the earring, I've got the Ill-Gotten Gain. This is a very good piece of jewelry that you can actually get your hands on as early as level 52, and it's basically going to be best in slot for a majority of builds up until you get another gold piece of jewelry that's closer to the 600 gear score. Why is it so good? Well, we get the Refreshing Toast for the 25% faster potion cooldown, Regenerating for the base health regeneration, and then Duplicating Toast, not super important, but it is nice to help you save a little bit on potions. I got Wilderness Ward on here as well. Apparently, you can just drag and drop a gem onto your Ill-Gotten Gain in order to give it the gem of choice. And the next question I know you guys are going to ask is, where do you actually get the Ill-Gotten Gain? It's a very easy item to get. You can farm it in Eden Grove, and you head down to the lower slag mine. There is a boss that has a rifle here, and he has a chance to drop it. You have to be level 52 or higher in order to get the drop. And then for the consumables, of course, guys, you want to use a health potion alongside a regeneration potion. They have their own independent cooldowns, so you can use both of them to heal actively while you're in combat. And you need mana potions. If you don't have 200 in intelligence for this build, which I personally don't have because I'm not at the 600 gear score, you're going to need mana potions to give you the Fire Staff sustain. Of course, you're going to want some food to eat while you're in combat. I really like the T5 Hearty Meal, 220 health per second for 20 seconds. Now, this will stop if you take damage while in combat, but one of the big advantages of playing a high-speed light armor build is that you can break distance, get to safety, and actually eat one of these hearty meals. Get yourself all the way back up to full health before your opponents are on top of you. And then last but not least, the food to give you increased max stats. I have the filet and mushroom sauce. It gives me 24 intelligence and 16 dexterity. The reason that I'm using this food is because it is very cheap, and I can actually just use this food throughout all of my regular gameplay. I don't even need to worry about, oh, is it going to cost me too much to use? It only cost me about 6 gold to make one of these bad boys, so yeah, this is the food of choice. There are other foods that you could use, and they require rare ingredients that are much more expensive to get your hands on. So for the attribute food for this build, I would say check on your server what the different recipes are for the different foods if you're going to make them yourself, and which one is the most feasible for you to make. If you're going to buy the food, I think the filet and mushroom sauce should have a pretty cheap cost just because the materials to make it, again, are very easy to get. You could also use a honing stone for this build. I haven't been because I just don't have access to any right now, and they're really expensive to buy, but you could, definitely wouldn't hurt. Alright guys, let's take a look at the points I have in my weapon mastery here. Of course, we have Riposte, Evade, and Flesh. These are my 3 favorite rapier skills for PvP, all of them so good for PvP. Riposte being a fantastic counter stun, and even if you don't counter stun your target, just being able to absorb the incoming attack, be invulnerable for a few moments, very valuable in PvP. And then if you do land the counter stun, Riposte gives you a really nice setup. You can roll behind your opponent right after stunning them, charge up a fully charged heavy attack, and hit them for some big damage with the backstab. Riposte also has a 12-second cooldown now, which just makes it so much better. Then we've got Evade, Evade being one of the best, if not the best ability that Rapier has. It basically allows you to do a dodge at any time, and this can interrupt any ability that you're casting as well. So it gives you the ability to exchange really well with your opponent, because if it feels like the attack that you're using isn't going to be favorable, you can just quickly evade out before the animation has continued. Not only that though, it's great for attacking. You can do something like a heavy attack into evade light attack and have both land at about the same time, giving you really huge burst damage with the evade. The fact that it gives us 20 stamina back when we use it is absolutely massive for the dodge roll game on this build. The movement speed, great. We're playing a mobile build, so movement speed definitely helps. And then evading forward for the increased damage, nice for the combos. And of course, individual light attacks will reduce the cooldown by 30% for evade. So if you're remaining fairly aggressive, you'll be able to pop evade often while in a fight. And on top of it, if you attack and use evade and land a couple hits, you'll have it ready for a defensive move right away too. And then we've got Flesh, the gap closer of choice for the Rapier. Honestly, a fantastic ability, and you can interrupt the gap close to get a backstab at any time, and you can just follow that up with something like an evade combo. Really, really fantastic stuff. Honestly, Flesh is such a good move to force a backstab on your opponent. The best time to use Flesh, in my opinion, offensively, is to wait until your opponent has no stamina and cannot roll dodge. Then if you get behind them with the Flesh and start backstabbing, they can't do anything to stop you from putting huge damage into them. And of course, if you get a kill with this ability, it significantly reduces the cooldown. And this counts both for downing a player as well as getting the finishing blow. So that's one time where the double Flesh could actually come in handy in a PvP situation. And then let's take a look at the passives I've got for the Rapier. Refreshing Strikes reduce all Rapier cooldowns by 1% on hit. Really nice. We've already got quite a bit invested into cooldown reduction with Refreshing, so just pushing that further. Desperation, deal 10% more damage when your stamina is below 40%. We are playing that stamina heavy build. We're rolling a lot. We've even got Gambit on the weapons, so even more damage potential if we find ourselves lower on stam. Controlled breathing, gain 3 stamina on any hit. This is actually very important because we can land so many hits rapidly with the Rapier. This goes a long way for our sustain while we're actively fighting in combat. And then we've got Red Curtains. Critical strikes reduce all cooldowns by 5%. Again, amazing for the cooldown reduction. And we're landing a lot of crits with those backstabs. Swiftness, 3% haste for 4 seconds on Rapier hits, and this can stack up to 5 times. Yeah, the Rapier does a great job kind of getting close to someone, dueling it out, being very fast, and having a lot of stamina to keep that fight going. And then the big passive that we've got is Momentum. It's been buffed to 30% increased damage on your next light or heavy attack after performing an ability, and that will end on hit or after 3 seconds. Especially with something like Evade that has such a rapid cooldown, and now even Riposte with the much lower cooldown that it has. Momentum is a fantastic passive to have for a burst rapier. So let's take a look at the Fire Staff. Fire Staff itself actually took quite a few nerfs coming into the new patch. That being said, it's still a great weapon, and for this build, it performs its job really well. So the abilities I've got is Fireball, Incinerate, and Burnout. You'll notice right away I have no passive points in Fireball, and that's simply because these additional things here don't increase the damage of the Fireball itself. They just give us Sustain or an increased duration on the burning field, which in PvP is honestly not a big deal. So yeah, just the single point in Fireball I think is perfectly fine. I like it quite a lot just as a skill because the Fireball itself is a large AoE blast, so you can hit multiple targets with it or even hit a target that is trickier to hit with the single fire projectiles from the staff itself. And then for the next skill, of course, Incinerate. This one I was a little on the edge to start using, but I've been using it for a few days now, and it's starting to really grow on me. I like Incinerate because the pushback actually makes this ability useful. If your opponent, however, has grit and they're not affected by the pushback, Incinerate can kind of plant you in place and put you in a pretty dangerous situation. So it really depends on what you're fighting to make Incinerate a useful skill. The fact that it double hits, though, absolutely amazing. It can put out an insane amount of damage. You could even do a Riposte, swap to the Fire Staff, and then just cast Incinerate right on their face. And then finally, I've got Burnout as the last Fire Staff skill. This is a fantastic utility skill for the Fire Staff. Not only is it the longest gap close in the game, but on top of it, it does a decent amount of damage, and it puts a pretty nasty burn on targets when you hit them with it. The one downside to Burnout is that it has a lengthier cast time, so if you have a lot of people actively on top of you, Burnout isn't always the best move to go for. Flesh, usually the better gap closer if you have a lot of opponents close to you, simply because that one will just cast right away. And you definitely want to invest into upgrading your Burnout so you can get the additional distance on it. Now, the Fire Staff passives. This is probably the most important part of the Fire Staff tree, in my opinion. Fire Staff has a lot of really good passives that make it play in certain ways. So let's take a look at what I picked here. The first one, Fiery Restoration. Heavy attacks reduce Fire Staff cooldowns by 10% on hit. Can never go wrong with more cooldown reduction. And then we've got Clear Minded. While holding a Fire Staff and above 50% mana, you gain a 5% in power. Just good for the outgoing damage. And then I've got Singe. Light attacks inflict burn on foes, dealing 3% weapon damage each second for 6 seconds. We've got a lot of different sources of burn on the Fire Staff, so this is just one of them from the light attacks. Spellslinger for the 10% increased critical strike chance. Very important because the Fire Staff has to crit in order to take advantage of a lot of the other passives that it has. And then I've got Prophet of a Fire God. While holding the Fire Staff, your critical strike damage is increased by 15%, more for those crits. And then Flare, heavy attacks no longer consume mana. This is kind of your flex passive. You could actually put this wherever you want. This is just the one I ended up picking for my build. And then Pyromania, while holding a Fire Staff and below 50% max health, you deal 15% increased damage. Let It Burn. Whenever a burn deals damage, you gain 10% Fortify for 2 seconds. Excellent utility from the burns on the Fire Staff. A very important passive for it. And then I've got Kindle. Burning lasts 20% longer. Great again. And then Watch It Burn. Critical hits with Fire Staff abilities inflict burning, dealing 3% weapon damage for each second for 6 seconds. They nerfed this passive pretty hard, but I think it's still worth investing in because you can crit with your Incinerate and your Burnout. Fireball can't crit anymore, so you won't be able to get Watch It Burn from that, which makes me pretty sad. But for the Burnout, at least, I think it's worth investing in this guy. And last but not least, we got Combat Speed. While you have an active Fire Staff ability, gain 10% haste for 5 seconds. And that's just nice for the mobility of the build again. Alright guys, let's get right into the footage and the commentary. I've got a lot of different fights for you guys, so I hope that you enjoy. Starting off with our first fight here, hanging out in Outpost Rush. I've been playing a lot of this game mode. There's a lot of good PvP to be had here, so yeah, I've been enjoying it a lot. Hanging out in the enemy keep. One of my favorite things to do is to put myself right in the back end of the enemy keep. And as you guys can see, I managed to find a couple people here to fight. I get a good riposte stun on the hammer player. Unfortunately, get too aggressive with my rapier light attacks, and he hits me with his counter stun. Not too worried about that distance stagger, though. That's not the worst move to get hit by the hammer. And this enemy healer is throwing some heals down. That's going to be annoying. I'm already focused on the hammer guy, and I'm trying to see how squishy he is to see if I can get a good combo. But that backstab right there told me that he is going to be fairly bulky. So I just retreat a little bit, just taking a bit of damage from the ranged projectiles there. Try to get a little bit of healing down, throw my potion in, and a third player comes in also wielding the Great Hammer, and it looks like Sword and Shield. So I just go again for the burnout, kite through, a nice incinerate at the back, and then quickly flesh through the player just to get outside of the gravity well right away. And you can see I'm just using the mobility of the fire staff and the rapier, rolling a lot to break distance with these guys. Fantastic riposte on the group there into the heavy attack, and then I go for the flesh and just evade out after doing the flesh right away. And now I go for the burnout through the group again, just forcing those turnarounds. Such a good strategy. And there you see I go for it again, not landing the backstab, but the dot from the fire staff, enough to take one of the hammer players down there. And they just keep chasing me, and they put quite a bit of damage. I managed to get the riposte eventually, but I definitely should have gone for it sooner. I was a little tunnel visioned on the guy that's on the ground there, wanting to get the kill on him, but it looks like they managed to pick him up. I'm not going to be able to seal the deal on that one. And a lot more players shooting projectiles at me, slowly getting surrounded by more and more red players here. And I just kind of retreat to the rocks. I think the terrain in the keep is probably a better option, but because there's so many people with ranged weapons, having the rocks gives you a little bit better of a, I guess, line of sight from all the rifles. So I just keep working my way further back in the woods here. We've got a lot of Great Axe guys chasing me. The hatchet player in front, they're just quickly killing the wolf too. And I'm just doing my best to kite around, actually moving through the group. It looks like 5 players on top of me. A nice heavy attack into the riposte, and I get a good read on him. Hit him with a little bit of damage, and then quickly evade back out of there. And I'm just kind of hugging this tree. Try to go for an incinerate. I was hoping someone would come around the corner and get hit by that. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen. Both players go for the charge there, and I go for the burnout, kind of anticipating that the gravity well is going to follow. And looking behind me, it does. I hope that this clip shows you guys the survivability that you can get on a build like this. Just the mobility alone is so good for avoiding tons of projectiles and making these heavy armor melee guys run to try to chase after you. You can see they're just all going for their gap closers. I try to go for a riposte there, and my riposte actually takes the cooldown but doesn't go off. So I think we could have kept it going a little longer, but it wasn't looking like we were going to win that fight anytime soon. Moving on to the next fight here, again, always hanging out in the enemy outpost and outpost rush. And I got a hammer guy and a life staff player here. I start by working the hammer player and trying to put a bit of damage into him. He throws down his gravity well right away, respond with the burnout. He saved his gap closer, anticipating that I would get out of that with a gap closer myself, so he stays on top of me. But that's okay. We're doing a good job just kind of rolling around him, feeding him rapier attacks, and trying to get those ripostes when we can. Take a nasty stun from his hammer there. I go for the heavy attack right into the riposte, unfortunately not landing the heavy, and then hit him with a heavy attack into the back there. And that axe player, he's got a bit of bulk to him. I'm definitely going to have to focus on taking out the healer first. So I switch targets here. He's in his ice tomb, actually. He just pops out. The axe player staying on top of me. I anticipate his incoming move with the riposte because he is just hacking at me. And I managed to get the good counter stun, and I'm trying to get on top of this enemy healer. He's kiting away from me and using the aggression from the axe player just to keep that distance. I finally managed to get on top of him. Huge damage with that flesh. I didn't see how hard it hit, but I think it crit to hit that hard. A couple pokes with the fire staff, and then I hit him with the rapier, and yeah, that guy was much squishier than the axe guy, so a good choice to shift the targets there. And now I've got just the axe guy left, and he starts by running in circles, goes for the big hammer slam. That's a pretty easy move to dodge if you see it coming. You've got a lot of time, as it has quite a long wind-up time. Most of the hammer skills, in fact, have quite long wind-up times, and there you can see I'm just being patient, waiting for him to go for that heavy, and then I hit him with the riposte. There's the flesh into the backstab. And fighting a melee player with the Rapier, it's not about exchanging and spamming light attacks. It's all about those kind of quick in and outs, and you can see I'm doing my best to just deliver those heavy attacks, and he gets me with a nice stun there. I go for the Incinerate, nice pushback, go for the Flesh tube behind him. He responds by attacking. I get the riposte right away, and we've got this guy fairly on the back foot. He's used his healing stuff already, so he's on cooldown. He lands that hammer stun. Unfortunately, I whip my camera in a weird angle. I don't see the next attack coming, but I managed to stay on top of him. He tries to eat some food to get a little bit of healing power, and a couple backstabs as he tries to run off the edge. And I've got one last fight for you guys today, again in the enemy outpost in Outpost Rush. And this clip here was a good turnaround, but I wanted to show off a lot of the durability that light armor has. Light armor is all about avoiding hits rather than trying to tank and exchange. And I hope the clips I've shown so far kind of illustrate the strength that light armor can actually have in PvP if you're playing that avoidance style of build. As you guys can see, I was able to get out of the keep safely, and even though I got hit by the snare from the Frost Staff there, the burnout was able to get me a little bit more distance. I try to come back inside, and right away I pull all of the enemy players here. They just start shooting at me with the projectiles. Definitely not safe for me to stand on the wall with so many players and their ranged attacks. Then I kite back around the backside of the keep here, and I pull a few players. We do have the friendly Brute here. He goes for some big damage on one of the players there. I get stunned by a few things. I want to get some distance behind the rocks. Unfortunately, I go for the Fire Staff burnout, and I hit the pole there. I don't get any distance. The enemy player pulling me in with his Great Axe as well. And I just keep breaking a little bit more distance from these guys. No range projectiles coming in, so I feel safe to turn around and engage. A fantastic riposte right away. Usually if you have 3 guys chasing you, they are going to attack, not hold their shots. So a good read on that one. We managed to quickly get the kill with the Flesh and the burnout through to finish that guy off. And I go for the heavy attack into another riposte here, roll through the player, try to get the backstab on that player. It looked like I had landed it, but I didn't get any damage numbers there, and I just keep on backing up. He tried to heal up a little bit, but it wasn't enough. I don't know if he has the T5 potions, and I end up bringing that guy down as well. Now I've got just the last enemy player out here, and we're just slowly duking it out. Go for the Rapier Gap Closer to try to get behind him. He's just being very patient now, and you can see how different people will play when they outnumber you versus when they don't. They're going to be a lot more careful. Spear player coming in from behind, but we end up winning the match, so that's the end of that fight anyway. And one last clip as I say goodbye. I want to thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. Again, if you want to check out a written guide, you can find it on my website, pvpnewworld.com. There's a link to it down below in the description for you guys. If you want to catch that live gameplay from me, you can always give me a follow on Twitch. And of course, if you want to keep up to date with me, give me a follow on Twitter. And last but not least, I do a New World Top 5 Battle Series. If you guys want to send in your own clips for the Top 5, you can send that to Kristofer at pvpnewworld.com. This show is sponsored by What the Fast. They're a VPN for gamers, and they can give you better ping to your favorite games, especially if you have a poor connection already. And there is a link down below in the description for you guys, free to try that. And last but not least, a massive thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show, for making this dream a reality. Thank you everybody for tuning in and watching. As always, I hope that you all enjoyed. Have a great night, everyone, and I'll see you next time.